Hello and welcome to another video. We'll be discussing 2 Kings chapter 5 and how it symbolizes salvation being both free and easy. This story discusses the two characters Naaman and Elijah mostly, and Elisha's wicked servant. Naaman, we'll find, was an honorable man, and Elisha was the apprentice of Elijah, who at this time has been taken up into heaven. Um, Again, this is a interesting story. I think we should read it through, for those that haven't maybe read the story or haven't read it that many times, because it is an interesting story. I should check, how many verses exactly there are. I think it's of medium length, so I don't know if we should maybe just skim through it a little bit, but there's 27 verses. It's not so long, but um, again, for those of you guys that have read it, the synopsis is basically that not only is salvation easy, which you can probably get on your first reads, but also free. That's also why Elisha, when he performs this miracle we're about to read about, of curing this man from leprosy, why there's no why he takes no reward for this. And leprosy often can symbolize sin in the Bible, so this is kind of what's being symbolized. And whenever someone's cured from leprosy, it's a type of picture of salvation. And this story is no exception. Let's begin reading, and then we can begin the analysis. But that's the 5-minute synopsis, and the full videos, maybe it'll take 20 minutes. Who knows? It's hard to say. It's not going to be nearly as long as the previous video I made. That one stretched real longer than I expected. So 2 Kings chapter 5 begins in saying, "Now Naaman, captain of the host of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master, and honorable, because by him the Lord hath given deliverance unto Syria. He was also a mighty man in valor, but he was a leper. And the Syrians had gone out by companies, and had brought away captive out of the land of Israel a little maid, and she waited on Naaman's wife. And she said unto her mistress, Would God my Lord were with the prophet that is in Samaria, for he would recover him of his leprosy." So here we have a maid, a mistress, that knows about Elisha and says great things about him, gives a good testimony on his behalf. At this point, Elisha is a known quantity. People understood that the gifts that Elijah had were, given the same spirit that rested upon Elijah as resting upon Elisha. I think this is also a great example where us as Christians, we can sometimes point people to maybe a good pastor or, someone we respect, in terms of someone who has good Christian wisdom, that we can point to. I think that's a good thing to do, to point Christians to, other Christians. This can sometimes be a good thing to do. Or even, if you have an unsaved friend, maybe you can point them to a pastor you respect. So this is, interesting how we can apply this in the modern day. So verse 4 continues in saying, "And one went in and told his Lord, saying, Thus and thus said the maid that is of the land of Israel. And the king of Syria said, Go, and I will send a letter unto the king of Israel. And he departed, and took with him 10 talents of silver, and 6,000 pieces of gold, and 10 changes of raiment. And it's important to note, as a side note, this is, of course, a ton of money. Um, I would estimate this to be at least, yeah, it's at least a few million in like today's currency to probably tens of millions worth of money that he's bringing with him to Israel. So it's a lot. It's a lot of money that that Naaman is bringing with him. So verse 6 continues in saying, "And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, Now when this letter is come unto thee, behold, I have therewith sent Naaman my servant to thee, that thou mayest recover him of his leprosy. And it came to pass, when the king of Israel had read the letter, that he rent his clothes, and said, Am I God, to kill and to make alive? That this man doth send unto me to recover a man of his leprosy. Wherefore consider, I pray you, and see how he seeketh a quarrel against me. And it was so, when Elijah the man of God had heard that the king of Israel had rent his clothes, that he sent to the king, saying, Wherefore hast thou rent thy clothes? Let him come now to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and with his chariot, and stood at the door of the house of Elijah. And Elijah sent a messenger unto him, saying, Go and wash in Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come again to thee, and thou shalt be clean. But Naaman was wroth, and went away, and said, Behold, I thought he will surely come out to me, and stand, and call on the name of the Lord his God, and strike his hand over the place, and recover the leper. And it's important to note that Elisha did not seem to really care about money. He didn't have much of a use for money. But, on the first read, this becomes apparent. First couple or few reads, this is definitely known. But in this specific case, he's especially not concerned with money, because I believe this is supposed to symbolize salvation, when Naaman, is ultimately cleansed from his leprosy, as we'll see as we continue on reading, of course. So, why I say this is that Elisha most likely did not live in a huge house. And so, Naaman was probably feeling especially insulted because, he could most likely hear that, Naaman was knocking. Who knows? Elisha might have been busy, doing something else. But again, it's not important that Elisha did not go and see Naaman face to face as Naaman would have liked. He wanted to have seen a miracle or something from Elisha, but all he got was his messenger. And, this is kind of like us, Christians, spreading the gospel today, saying how easy it is to get saved, just go and wash yourself in Jordan 7 times, And so, this is a very easy task, as it's a local, river. And so, and it's also interesting that it's Jordan. It's got a lot of history there. But so that's kind of us, the messengers. And, I don't know if Elisha is supposed to picture, Christ or whatever in this story. It's possible, so that's one interpretation that can be had. Not that others can't be had. This is just, one idea I have, and, maybe this is true, But anyway, let's continue and reading in verse 12, which says, Are not Abana and Pharpar, rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? May I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in a rage. And I also want to make a note, a lot of people like to make up their own way to heaven, and say, hey, these rivers are cleaner. They try to lean on their own understanding. Shouldn't I live a sinless life in order to get to heaven? Not knowing that that's impossible. Or, shouldn't I, turn away from my sins? So you have all these types of deals where, people think they need to turn away from their sins or whatever, so don't lean on your own understanding to get to heaven. Know that, we need to rely on the Bible as our, authority. And, a lot of people that don't like reading the Bible, they generally say this, and I'm sure most people know that. So let's continue in reading verse 13, which reads, And his servant came near and spake unto him and said, My father, if the prophet had bid thee do some great thing, wouldest thou not have done it? How much rather than when he saith to wash thee, wash and be clean? This verse shows that it's good to have, people, even if they are your sons, to, be supportive of, the Word of God in your life. And, if the Bible says to do something, it's good to have a good friend like this, unlike, the friend that I think Absalom had, where he had a bad friend. This is a good friend who encourages Naaman to, follow the word of the Lord, and so this ultimately allows him to be free of leprosy. So, it's good to have good friends in your life, and this is just another example. Verse 14 continues in reading, Then went he down and dipped himself 7 times in Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God, and his flesh came again like unto the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. This, of course, is a picture of being born again. So this is quite clear, but it is interesting to see this parallel. Verse 15 continues in reading and says, And he returned to the man of God, he and all his company, and came and stood before him. And he said, Behold, now I know there is no God in all the earth, but in Israel. Now therefore, I pray thee, take a blessing of thy servant. But he said, As the Lord liveth, before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. And Naaman said, Shall there not then, I pray thee, be given to thy servants 2 mules, burden of earth? For thy servant will henceforth offer neither burnt offering nor sacrifice unto other gods, but unto the Lord. And, what's interesting here is the reason Naaman wants to bring back, some dirt from the land of Israel is in that time, many people believed that you had to serve these gods of certain lands on their territory, that, they believed that there were certain gods of the mountains and of the valleys, and of course Naaman doesn't understand that, God really doesn't need to be served on, Israel's ground, that he can be served from anywhere because he is, God of the entire earth. So, he just got saved at this point, but of course he doesn't know all the doctrine, and, he's still as a spiritual babe, not really, ready for the strong meat of the word. He doesn't understand everything just yet because he had just been saved. But again, salvation is the free gift of God, lest anyone shall boast. This is, I believe, why Elisha, most importantly, is very strict on this, that he doesn't want a reward, that, this is why he's refusing a reward for this act. So if we continue to verse 18, it reads, And this thing the Lord pardon thy servant, that when my master goeth into the house of Rimmon to worship there, and he leaneth on my hand, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, when I bow down myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon thy servant in this thing. And he said unto him, Go in peace. So he departed from him a little way. And what we see here is Naaman is looking to compromise. He's expected to go and bow in this house of idolatry. And this brings to mind the story of Daniel chapter 3, where they're asked to bow before the idol that Nebuchadnezzar, set up. It's another scenario like this, but the only problem is we see here that Naaman's compromising in the fact that, he's still going to bow in this house of idolatry, but he's recognized that Jesus Christ is the Lord and Savior. So, of course, this is not what we want. We want to be able to stand against these things of the devil, that it would be better if he went back to his country, shared the gospel of God, and to refuse to serve any other God. And so he does refuse to serve any other God, but because his actions do not show the change, other people cannot see the change, and therefore other people are not going to be saved as a result of him being saved if he's not shining his light that he now has. Nevertheless, Elisha says, Go in peace. So he departs, and so we will pick this back up in reading verse 20, which states, But Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said, Behold, my master has spared Naaman the Syrian, and not receiving at his hands that which he brought, but as the Lord liveth, I will run after him, and take somewhat of him. So Gehazi followed after Naaman, and when Naaman saw him running after him, he lighted down from the chariot to meet him, and said, Is all well? And he said, All is well, my master has sent me, saying, Behold, even now there be come to me from Mount Ephraim 2 young men of the sons of the prophets. Give them, I pray thee, a talent of silver and 2 changes of garments. So verse 23 continues in saying, And Naaman said, Be content, take 2 talents. And he urged him, and bound 2 talents of silver in 2 bags, with 2 changes of garments, and laid them upon 2 of his servants, and they bare them before him. And when he came to the tower, he took them from their hand, and bestowed them in the house, and he let the men go, and they departed. But he went in and stood before his master, and Elisha said unto him, Whence comest thou, Gehazi? And he said, Thy servant went no whither. And he said unto him, Went not my heart with thee when the man turned again from his chariot to meet thee? Is it a time to receive money, and to receive garments, and olive yards, and vineyards, and sheep, and oxen, and men servants, and maidservants? The leprosy therefore of Naaman shall cleave unto thee, and unto thy seed forever. And he went out from his presence a leper as white as snow. So this is a very serious thing that his servant Gehazi made. This sin is extremely serious, because this is kind of breaking the picture of salvation that God was trying to paint. I believe that's a lot of the reason why this is taken so seriously. Once an agreement is struck, I think it's important to keep that, and not to go back and say, hey, can I have a little more, or than what was bargained for. You'll have apprentices kind of go and do their own thing against the word of the Lord, where the teacher would not, or the preacher would not condone of these actions. Guys like Gehazi should be sent away, so this is too bad what he does. Some people will just cling to the riches of this world, and it's even a temptation for those who are saved. It's very possible that Gehazi was saved, but again, this shows that, having the love of money, that is not only the root of all evil, which it's interesting how now he has the leprosy, which would symbolize sin, and ultimately death. When sin is finished, it bringeth forth death. The wages of sin is death. Yeah, it's really an interesting story. I thought I'd share it. Naaman was easily cleansed of his leprosy, after just dunking himself in this local river, 7 times. It was not a complicated process where he had to go and journey somewhere crazy. It was quite simple to be saved, and also it was free. And so, this is just the story I wanted to share. Thank you guys for listening, and yeah, tune in for my next video. Thanks.